You're listening to the Black Eagles podcast with Sinan Schwarting and Kaan Bayazit.
Ahmet Dursun Sergen aldı. Sergen Bülent yan yana. Sergen Bülent. Sergen. Yanında Tümer var. Tümer'e doğru aksın kaybetti. Tümer topu aldı. Sergen aldı. Gol! Gol! Gol! Sergen attı. Sergen attı. Şampiyonluk geldi. Sergen attı. Şampiyonluk geldi.
İbrahim'in pası. Roma. Şimdi Ahmet. İkinci gole gidiyor Beşiktaş. Ahmet. Ve
Welcome back, everybody. Episode 62 of Beşiktaş International's The Black Eagles podcast. And I am your host, Sinan Schwarting, live from New York City, as always. And yes, that's right, you hear the applause, which means, sadly, that everyone's favorite co-host, Kaan Bayazit, is not here with me, which is not a big deal. Don't worry, he will be back. Just the usual time zone difference issues. Nothing to fear for you loyal listeners. But yeah, here I am doing the post-match episode for the match on the road against Kayserispor in the Kadir Has Stadium. And I don't really want to say too much in order to avoid spoiling anything. So let me just cut straight to the chase. First of all, lineups. Lineups were, not particularly surprising, except perhaps for one distinct change in the lineup. First of all, before I get to what that distinct change would be, Adriano played on the right side as a fullback, and Caner Erkin on the left. Gökhan Günal was not available. Domagoj Vida and Gary Medel played on the back line, and that is perhaps a surprise that Medel was back there instead of Nicolas Isimat Mirin, or Isi Miran, as we like to call him around here. One can only assume that was a product of last week's performance, the second half against Fener. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But this is not the time nor the place. I'm not gonna get into analysis yet. I'll start by just going through the lineups, going through the match events. For anyone who didn't see the match, that way you can be caught up to speed properly. Of course, Karius started in the goal. Dorukhan Tokuz and Atiba Hutchinson started in the back of our midfield with Adem Ljajic in the number 10 slot. Guven Yalchin started on the left side of the midfield with Ricardo Quaresma on the right side. So Germain Lenz has officially been demoted. We can assume he was on the bench. Burak Yilmaz started up front. No surprises there. As far as Kayserispor's lineup goes, I'm not going to go too far into it. Perhaps the only real surprise, for me anyway, is that Asamoah Gyan still is not starting for Kayserispor. They went with Artyom Kravets, the Ukrainian striker, and Umut Bulut behind him. I suppose in more of that central forward role. We'll talk about the results now, I suppose. So, as far as the match itself goes, it was somewhat of it was a cagey affair right from the get-go. One could hardly say Beşiktaş dominated, although they did hold most of the ball and they did look the more dangerous side fairly early on. The first bit of action was in the 15th minute where Dorukhan Tokuz got himself a yellow card. In the 33rd minute, Bernard Mensah got himself injured and was subbed out for Hüseyin Açar. And only 4 minutes later, Beşiktaş got things going, scoring a goal. It was a corner kick that dropped into Dorukhan Tokuz, who headed it perfectly onto Atiba's foot, and he smashed it in the goal. Atiba Hutchinson continues his sort of newfound prolific offensive ability. And to great effect, Beşiktaş takes the lead 0-1 here on the road in the 37th minute again. And that would be most of the action in the first half. There was another yellow card dished out to Oleksandr Kucher, another Ukrainian player on Kayserispor. But yeah, that was how the match would look going into the half. A lead for Beşiktaş, a 1-goal lead, though a precarious one. I don't think one could really make the argument that Beşiktaş had been particularly dominant. Again, maybe in terms of possession, but as we all know, that does not always spell success on the pitch in and of itself. Anyway, into the second half, no subs were made. In the 55th minute, Shamil Chinaz got himself a yellow card. He had been playing fairly rough throughout the match. It may have been an accumulation of fouls more than anything. And anyhow, it didn't really affect Kayseri's game plan, although perhaps it did signal their intensity and intent. Sure enough, 2 minutes later, in the 57th minute, a nice cross comes in from Sylvester Varela. Drops to Artyom Kravets, and Kravets makes no mistake with his head crossing it, or I should say, tucking it in to the bottom right corner past the keeper perfectly. No one really to blame defensively. It was just a very well executed finish. Not much one could really do about it, honestly. It was very perfectly placed, just beyond the keeper's reach. And there it was, tied at 1-1. In the 60th minute, an interesting sub was made. Dorukhan Tokuz got injured. He was down for a couple minutes, maybe that's an exaggeration, probably a few seconds in reality, but clutched his leg. He was limping a little bit. He came off for Enzo Rocco, which meant, I think, that Enzo Rocco was plugged into the back line on defense, and Gary Medel was then slid forward into the back of the midfield, leaving Beşiktaş with Atiba Hutchinson and Gary Medel in the center of the midfield, something that many Beşiktaş fans will note has not been a very good pairing historically for the team. Anyhow, 2 minutes later, and hardly even because of that, I don't think you really put that as the culprit for this. In the 62nd minute, Caner Erkin clumsily throws the ball into Atiba Hutchinson, who does control it, but I don't know if he's not warned or if he doesn't hear the warning. Deniz Turuc sneaks in behind him, slinks away with the ball, rushes into the goal box, catches everyone off guard. The whole defense had been shifted left to meet the throw-in. Thinking, of course, Beşiktaş was safely in possession of the ball. Obviously, this proved not to be true. Deniz Turuc put it right past Loris Karius, scoring a pretty nice goal, if you're going to be honest about it, and giving Kayserispor the lead at home 2-1. And of course, that was a pretty big deal for them because they had been pressing, they'd been pushing for that goal. I think you could say they probably deserved it, and it wasn't looking too good, not for Beşiktaş anyway. In the 69th minute, 7 minutes later, Jermaine Lens comes into the match for Guven Yalçın, who had been putting in quite a bit of effort up to that point, but a little bit clumsy. One shouldn't judge him too harshly. I think he is really playing out of position. He's a striker playing as a winger. So, one would expect for him to have certain technical deficiencies, I guess you could say. After that, 3 minutes later, in the 72nd minute, Levent Gülen comes in for Sylvester Varela, who had assisted the first goal to great effect. Deniz Turuc would then get himself a yellow card 6 minutes later in the 78th minute. And in the 80th minute, Ozan would come into the match for Atiba Hutchinson, probably rectifying that situation in the midfield, giving Beşiktaş a proper creative outlet in the center of the midfield behind Adem Ljajic. And sure enough, Beşiktaş starts to press fairly convincingly at this point. In the 90th minute, Ricardo Quaresma is brought down pretty far outside of the box on the left side. Caner Erkin steps in to take a free kick. The ball trickles through the box untouched completely by anyone on offense or defense. And sure enough, trickles into the goal. In the end, equalizing the match 2-2 in exactly the 90th minute. I don't even think extra time had been announced yet. Sure enough, they would give 4 minutes of extra time. which was interesting. They took about 4 minutes to look at a goal that had been denied, that had been taken away due to a foul that Kayseri should or would theoretically have scored. So that alone should have been about 4 minutes of extra time. It was odd. It was a very short amount given, although they did go over the mark a bit. Quaresma was given a yellow card in the 3rd minute of extra time. Ozan was given a yellow card in the 4th minute of extra time. And Asamoah Gyan, who I previously mentioned very briefly, entered the game in the 6th minute of extra time. So they did, in fact, go a bit overboard, you could say, on extra time, but not so much so that it really impacted the game very much. Yeah, that's how it ended. Gyan did not get too much action. I think there may have been one final last-ditch effort made by Kayserispor. Kayas made a couple saves late in the match, as I recall. But yeah, that's how it ended. 2-2. Beşiktaş gets the draw. Not an ideal result. I think we could most certainly say that much, at the very least. But so yeah, that leads to some interesting results in the table. Maybe it's a good time to talk about that, and then we'll segue back into the match before we get into analysis via the stat flash. But so first, yeah, let's talk about the Super League and where this leaves Beşiktaş. Beşiktaş, with one more point, now has 41 after 24 matches played. They are 5 points behind Galatasaray, who also got a point this weekend, and 13 points behind Başakşehir, who got a full 3 points this weekend. I won't go into any sort of detail whatsoever, but needless to say, Galatasaray got a point as well, given the same point differential between Beşiktaş and Galatasaray at 5 points. They did, in fact, draw with Erzurumspor 1-1. This would be on Sunday, so Beşiktaş played Saturday. Also, Başakşehir beat Yeni Malatyaspor on the road, so a good result for them, 2-0. So yes, Beşiktaş is firmly in 3rd place with 41 points, 5 points back on Galatasaray, 13 back on Başakşehir, and, should be of note, 5 points ahead of Trabzonspor. Trabzon will be playing Kasımpaşa on the road tomorrow, which I guess is on Monday, which should also be just about when you guys are getting this episode. So if you're listening to this on Monday, the Trabzonspor match will be maybe shortly following you're listening to this episode. Whatever the result may be there, the best Trabzonspor can do is be 2 points behind Beşiktaş if they get a full 3 points. Who knows what the likelihood of that is with Kasımpaşa these days. Could be good for Trabzonspor, in fact. But anyway, Trabzonspor should not be able to catch, but Trabzonspor cannot catch Beşiktaş after this week. Although next week, the sky's the limit for them, I guess. They could only be 2 points back, and if Beşiktaş drops, well, let's not even speculate. Beşiktaş will face Konyaspor next week at home at the Vodafone Park. But I'll talk more about that at the end of the episode as we preview our next one. On the bottom, at the bottom of the table, as you've heard, Erzurumspor got a point, so they're now at 22. They're second from bottom. Akhisar is still at the bottom with 18 points. Akhisar will also be playing on Monday, tomorrow, for me now, against Alanyaspor. They'll be at home. Alanyaspor has been fairly good, though, especially in the second half of the season, so it could be tough for them. At 18 points, they are distinctly at the bottom of the table. Erzurum with that 4-point advantage above them. And then here's a bit of a surprise, perhaps. Right above them in that 16th position in the final relegation spot is Göztepe with 26 points. But they're still, they're still in the hunt. For Erzurumspor, it's not looking too good. They're 4 points back on that final relegation spot now. They've played really well. They managed another point against Galatasaray this week. They were at home. But not enough, I guess. They'll have to step it up if they want to get out of there, being 4 points back on that final spot. In that hunt with Göztepe for the final one, Göztepe is sitting there now. But Bursaspor is at 27 points, 1 point above Göztepe. Fener at 28 points. Rizespor also at 28 points. Fener beat Rizespor this weekend 3-2. So that was a big one for them, and that brings Rize back down a notch. They've been playing very well going into this match. Kasımpaşa is right above Rize with 29 points, and Ankaragücü with 30. So those are the guys who are kind of in the 4-point range of that bottom relegation spot. It would be a shame if a team like Göztepe went down. I think Izmir deserves a place in the Super League. They have a very good fan base, very devoted fans, and nice audience, nice crowds at matches, all of that stuff. But anyhow, let's get back to the match a little bit. Before I go full on into analysis, let's talk about some stats. Let's see what this match looks like on paper, and see, if that can illuminate what you might think of this match. For those who haven't seen it, and for those of us who have, if we think these stats are an accurate reflection. First of all, Kayserispor led the way in terms of shots with 14 compared to Beşiktaş's 10. They had 5 on target to Beşiktaş's 4, which means Karius made 3 saves. At least, 3 saves that were on target, maybe more. Who knows? Possession, Beşiktaş had 60% of the ball compared to Kayseri's 40, naturally. Interesting. I'll make a note of that. Put that one to the side for the moment, if you will. Beşiktaş completed 470 passes to Kayserispor's 318, and a fairly high clip, a very efficient rate, 80% accuracy to Kayserispor's 66%. So, something to take note of as well, perhaps. Fouls, 16 were committed by Kayserispor compared to Beşiktaş's 11, and that is a strategy that's been implemented to great effect against Beşiktaş throughout the season in terms of stopping the clock, killing the momentum of the game. Beşiktaş has some very solid, technically proficient players who can be impacted by those little stoppages, slowing down the pace of the match. So, again, success in that regard, perhaps for Kayseri. They were pressing a lot in the second half, which led to their success. Naturally, it's a strategy that's often been employed to great success against Şenol Güneş. Yellow cards, 3 apiece, and at first Kayserispor was leading the way, but in the very end, in fact, in extra time, Beşiktaş got those 2 via Quaresma and Ozan, and so you have it. What's left to say? No red cards given out. Offsides, Kayserispor were offsides 4 times, Beşiktaş 3. So Beşiktaş is finally getting offsides a little bit. Kaan and I have talked a bit about how it's not necessarily a good look for Beşiktaş to not be offsides at all, especially a guy like Burak Yilmaz, who is so notoriously offsides so often. Beşiktaş did have 7 corners to Kayseri's 4. So there was some intent there. There was some aggression going forward. Again, you'd expect that given that Beşiktaş was down. And so, I think that can explain a lot of how Beşiktaş had 60% of the ball as well, since Beşiktaş had to press and get that equalizer for a bunch of the game. Although Kayserispor was down for some time as well, so it shouldn't fully explain it if we're going to be honest with ourselves. Clearly that was by design, whether by Şenol Güneş's design or by Kayserispor's design. That's another story, perhaps, but definitely Kayserispor played very effective counter-attacking football, and the stats show that. Their accuracy was not very solid, but perhaps it didn't need to be. They only needed a few chances, and they capitalized on those. Beşiktaş, whenever a team was in the match, you expect efficient passing, and that's generally been the case. That was not the case against Fener, and that was troubling. But here we were again, Beşiktaş with 80% efficiency in terms of passing. So, it wasn't a terrible match, at least in terms of players doing what they're supposed to, which puts maybe more of a highlight on the strategy and tactics employed by the coach. Now, with that said, and with the stats basically covered, as I dig into analysis, I want to make a note. I am not going to spend this entire episode talking about Şenol Güneş. I am not going to talk about how his strategy and his tactics were the sole reason why we lost this match, even though they probably are in some ways, as is often the case. of late, anyhow. The reason I'm not going to do that is because we do that a lot. I don't want to harp on it. We've beat this thing to death. And here's the thing. News flash. And here's your news song. Those of you who have been around the block, who are loyal listeners, will recognize this as breaking news, although it's not that breaking. Şenol Güneş is officially out of here. Not now. What we know for sure, as of right now, is that Şenol Güneş will be signing to join the national team as their coach in June, at the end of the Super League season. Now that's interesting. That means that this last 6 months, should Şenol Güneş stay in as the coach, will be something of a lame duck session for him. He's not evolving anything. He's not developing anything because he's out of town. He could be trying to get these guys to play well so that he's remembered fondly by Beşiktaş faithful. Certainly, he's had great success with the club. It would serve him well to leave in good graces. But what's truly his incentive to do well at this point? I mean, the league's already basically blown, right? Başakşehir here has it. 13 points up on Beşiktaş. 8 points up on Galatasaray. Beşiktaş needs to be competing for that second spot in that Champions League spot, and in turn the Champions League money. But even that's increasingly looking like it's going to be difficult. Of course, Beşiktaş will play Galatasaray again. They'll have the opportunity to close that gap and make this thing a fight. But the way they're playing now, is that really a realistic expectation? And if the answer to that is no, which it probably should be, if you're thinking about this all rationally, where does that leave Beşiktaş now? One can't help but feel that with these last few months, Beşiktaş would be best served to be getting in the next coach and giving them the opportunity to spend this time getting acquainted, getting the team acquainted to his system, to how he wants the team to play, to the tactic he wants the team to be playing in strategically, to the roles that he wants these guys to sort of maybe adapt into. It could be time well spent. It could be a very valuable time for whoever that coach would be. You know that the podcast favorite is Guti. I've said that, at least mine is. I don't want to speak for Khan. I would love to see Guti come in for the sake of consistency. He knows the squad. He knows where they're coming from. He's been working under Şenol Güneş, so he kind of knows the ethos they've been adapting and are applying, and he knows, hopefully, where it's maybe gone wrong. Obviously, that remains to be seen. But it minimizes the risk factor, certainly, of bringing someone in at this stage of the season, while also enabling the team to sort of plan forward, do some forward thinking, some planning for what might be coming ahead. There have been rumors about Slaven Bilic. Increasingly, he just left his post somewhere down on the Arabian Peninsula. I don't know exactly where he was coaching, to be honest. There's talk of Mircea Lucescu, who's obviously just lost his job with the national team. I'd like to see Guti in that role. I think it's probably for the best of the club right now. I think that one needs to listen to our previous episode where we interviewed Alex Kirkland of Real Madrid TV. Great episode. Khan interviewed him very well. And we got a lot of insight as far as what a Coach Guti might look like. I liked what I heard. I can't see anything wrong in it. He's already with the club again. Now, again, I said I wasn't going to talk about Şenol Güneş too much, and I'm not. As far as my opinions, I've just put everything on the table as far as what we know, what the news has reported, and that's it. Now let's talk football here, shall we? This match, besides the fact that it's basically an unmitigated disaster as far as where this club is right now and what it needed in order to stay relevant, in order to stay within striking distance of Galatasaray, and I suppose in theory Beşiktaş here, although we all know that's not particularly realistic anymore. It's not a disaster in the big picture. Like, in a vacuum, in any normal circumstance, getting a point on the road in Kayseri at the Kadir Has Stadium is not a negative thing. It'd be a challenge for any club in Turkey to do. And it's not, that in and of itself would not be a reason to hit the panic bells, to raise the alarm, whatever it would be. But again, it's not the result that this club needed right now. The big, I don't know what we'll call it, controversy, the big talk right now is that Loris Karius is to blame for many of our problems. Of course, we've said this before, but it's coming up again. It came up after the Fener match. It's come up again after this match. People blamed the second goal on him, which I find totally absurd. Blame has to fall on Caner Erkin, whose throw was mistimed and caught everyone off guard. Secondly, perhaps Atiba Hutchinson for letting Deniz Turuc take the ball off of him as easily as the ball was taken off of him. Although the argument could very easily be made that something needed to be communicated more clearly to Atiba, so he was more conscious of Deniz Turuc's approach. We don't know what happened, if that maybe was communicated. It's not necessarily worth speculating on. Clearly, it was a big error. Clearly, the throw-in was not very well timed, since guys didn't seem too locked in at that point. I don't know who's to blame for that or what happened. It was a major breakdown. I don't think you can blame Loris Karius. He came out. He's rushing a guy who's on a one-on-one. He can pick left or right, or you can kind of position yourself to try to mitigate both angles as best you can in case the strike isn't that clean. I think he chose that option. He wasn't frozen in his place or anything by that stretch. I think he was rushing out and trying to make himself wide so as to cut off both angles as best he could. The best of both worlds, if you will. Anyway, it didn't pan out. Deniz Turuc finished very nicely. Supposedly, Galatasaray's in for him at the end of this season, I think on a free. If that's the case, maybe he showed something today that could give them something to be hopeful for. I won't comment too much on that. I wouldn't necessarily be particularly excited about Deniz Turuc coming to Beşiktaş after just seeing today. But he did have a good match, no doubt. He's not particularly young, though. I mean, whatever. Anyway, let's get into this a little bit, I suppose. Now, in terms of highlights and lowlights, on a day like today, you probably want to focus on lowlights, but this is a hard one. I said I wasn't going to harp on Şenol Güneş. Of course, the instinct is to maybe blame things on tactics a little bit here and organization. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay true to my word. Who do I blame for today individually? And of course, that's not a realistic way of phrasing it. Can't blame any one individual. Today was a general failure, as they typically are. But I personally think now you could highlight either Caner Erkin or Atiba for what they contributed on those goals, or what they didn't contribute, I suppose, as it were. But the ironic thing is both of them scored goals themselves. I suppose to erase their mistake off the board, if you will. Of course, it doesn't quite even out necessarily. The team needed more than that in the end, obviously. But still, Atiba scored a nice goal. Caner Erkin's goal was not particularly nice and clearly a mistake, but it happened nonetheless, and you've got to give him credit for it. I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path here and say Gary Medel is my low light for this match. Gary Medel ghosted, which is never good in the central of your midfield. And he's not apt for that position. Enzo Rocco came in and shifted him up into that role, which is not ideal. Perhaps the argument to be made is Gary Medel should not have been playing at all. If you're confident enough in Enzo Rocco to play him in this match, maybe you give him the start. So you have a central defender in there, and so that you're not forced to then slide Gary Medel into that position where he's not been effective for quite a few months now. But yeah, Gary Medel ghosted, which is the worst thing you can do at this stage of the season in particular. I guess maybe it's even a little late now, but particularly this late in the season, and in a role which was so pivotal for the club. So Gary Medel, I think, has to be the recipient of my low light. Guven Yalchin, again, was very clumsy, a little awkward out there, but I would not say that, again, he's playing out of position, and he showed a lot of energy. He showed a lot of verve. He even had a nice move, I suppose, maybe at one point. Adem Ljajic did not show a lot of creativity, but he wasn't given much of an opportunity to. You have to put that on those guys on the back line to get the ball to him. And it wasn't happening too much. Quaresma, no flashes of brilliance from him today. He played a whole match. Got himself another silly yellow. You could probably, any one of these guys could be given a low light for either ghosting or underperforming. But I'm gonna highlight Gary Medel as again, because I think it can't be underscored enough how ill-suited he's become for that role in the back of our midfield. And Dorkan's come in for quite a few match days in a row now and stepped into that role and overperformed, perhaps. Not just fulfilled the role of a defensive midfield, but also some of the role of a central midfielder, kind of somehow deflecting, minimizing a gaping hole in the squad that Şenol Güneş has persisted on going for. Ozan Özyakup may not be in high form, may not be the most confident he's been in his career, but clearly that's the role that he plays, and that's the guy on our team who can play that role now. So it's odd that he hadn't played at all until literally today. It was the first time he'd made an appearance in quite some time, and he didn't come in until the 80th minute. Of course, we scored a goal 10 minutes later after pressing fairly well, actually, for much of the game. I don't think that's a coincidence. So, I don't know. Tactically, we're not rolling well with two defensive midfielders, and if Dorkan is a quasi-defensive midfielder, sort of who can fill the role of a central midfielder, fine. But when he's not in there, which he wasn't today because of injury, where does that leave us? It led us perhaps today to a poor decision, but that poor decision's result was Gary Medel playing poorly in a very important role. So, sir, I'm sorry to do this to you. I love your pugnacious attitude generally, but today it did not work out very well for the club. And you, my friend, mi amigo, get the low light. The highlight. Now, it's even harder to give out a highlight today, because who do you give it to? The goal scorers, both Atiba Hutchinson and Cüneyt Erkin, are probably both solely responsible for one of the goals, or dually, I guess. They share responsibility for that one goal that Deniz Türüç scored. So you're obviously not going to give it to either of them. Atiba affected the game well, as he typically does, but was also a little flagging today in energy. Perhaps this many games consecutively at this stage of his career might be asking a bit much of him. But surely enough, we don't quite have the substitute for him yet for that in that defensive midfield role, especially if we're going to be relying on Dorkan to dual handle that central midfield role. So no answers really as far as what we do without Atiba. So when he isn't at his perfect grade A performance, this is what we get. So yeah, clearly he's not going to be the highlight. As I said, Adem Ljajic put in a bit of a stinker today. Not a stinker. I mean, he had a quiet day. Not a highlight. Burak Yilmaz actually started to make a bit more of an appearance later on in the match, which is a little funny, but not very effective, sadly. Quaresma showed not much. It's not a day that you really want to be given the role of having to do this. But I'll tell you who I am going to give it to. Bit of a wild card, if you will. Senor Enzo Rocco, another Chilean. So today's both highlights and lowlights are going to the nation of Chile. So apologies and salutations, I suppose. But yeah, Enzo Rocco came in, had one tackle that was distinctively good. Of course, 2 minutes after he entered the match was when Deniz Türüç scored that goal, but you could not blame Enzo Rocco for that. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but the whole defense had shifted to the left side of the field because we were throwing the ball and Cüneyt Erkin was throwing it in. and Enzo Rocca specifically was hugging the line, I think, to try to give Janer an outlet to throw the ball into. So yeah, that goal was definitely not on him. And yeah, he played well. He showed speed. He showed pace, which was the big knock on him, actually. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say he showed speed or pace, but at least he did. He showed that wasn't an issue for him necessarily, that he can play well enough tactically, as far as positioning-wise, to not have to rely on speed in a way that, revealed itself today as a weakness. And yeah, one very important tackle that saved Beşiktaş from more blushes, probably. And yeah, what I like again is that, I mean, everyone had pegged him as a loser, as a dud, because he'd played 2 or 3 matches earlier on the season. And I mean, honestly, I think he played fairly well in the first 2 and then had one stinker and got yanked, much like Nicolas Miran was yanked after last week's poor half against Fenerbahce, really, because it was just a half of a match that he was very poor in. And I gotta say, terrible decision by Şenol. I don't want to talk about it too much. I don't want to criticize Şenol Güneş too much. It really is a chapter that's already closed, but it's like psychological torment for when a guy has a really poor outing to just yank him like that. You're not. It's a coach's job, a manager's job, to build their players' confidence, especially new guys, which Enzo Rocca was at the beginning of this season when he got yanked, and which Issy Miran is now being yanked as we speak. Next week should be interesting. Who gets the nod on the back line? Do we go with Medel again, who was not particularly strong today? Do we go with Enzo Rocca, who was fairly strong today? Does he go back with Issy Miran? I would say it's doubtful, given that he yanked him. But I still think he's not at all a player you give up on. And so in that case, maybe you kind of do want to put him back in there. It's going to be interesting. It's something definitely to take note of. Khan and I will probably discuss it at length, whatever the decision is. But yeah, interesting decision that it's going to be upcoming as far as who to pair with Domagoj Vida on the back line. And I think it's been unnecessarily complicated by Şenol Güneş's decision to yank Issy Miran. Again, good that Enzo Rocca played well, and good that we have to have this debate, that he played well enough that we might wonder if he earned himself a role. But bad insofar as now we have another, not a young central defender. Both Enzo Rocca and Issy Miran are young enough that they could both be good going forward, but a little bit redundant, and neither of them is cheap enough. I mean, Issy Miran is actually fairly cheap. His contract is good, but Enzo Rocca is not. So I don't know where you go from here, frankly. But let's hope for the best. And it's not a bad thing that Enzo Rocca played well. You never want to say that. But yeah, I don't think there's a lot more to say about this match, quite honestly. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No moments of great contention. No real failures by the refs to speak of, besides sort of minimal ones here and there. We dropped points fair and square here, and if anything, we were lucky to come away with a point in the end. Hardly earned that last goal. You could say the team pressed well up to that point, so perhaps they did quote unquote earn it, but they certainly, the goal itself wasn't pretty, but it didn't have to be. The game ended 2-2. Beşiktaş rolls on to the next match, the Beşiktaş 25th of the season, which will come against Konyaspor. And let's talk about that. That match is going to be on Sunday, a noon game. So for those of us, noon I should say, here in New York City on United States Eastern Standard Time. Interestingly, this match on Saturday was on at 8 a.m. for those of us here in New York, so that was a bit of a rough awakening, just to wake up early and then see the team drop points needlessly. But so yeah, Sunday, on at noon, perhaps good brunch time for those of us here. I believe that means 6 p.m. in Belgium for Cannes, or Central Europe, maybe 5 p.m., which would mean that the game will be on at 7 or 8 p.m. in Istanbul. Check your local listings, of course. And besides that, I guess I'm taking us out, really, because there's nothing left to say. As always, thank you for following us. Your loyal following is much appreciated. Spread the word about the sensation that is the Black Eagles podcast. Tell your friends, your lovers, your personal droid units, whoever it is that might need to know more about Beşiktaş. Who needs more Beşiktaş in their lives. As always, follow us online. Get up on Twitter, where the conversation's always being had. We do have more of a following there these days, which is fun. I always enjoy interacting with people. Follow the podcast at Eagles_podcast. Follow the mothership, Beşiktaş International. Especially these days, there should be news forthcoming about coaching decisions, perhaps. Maybe we'll get some insight as far as who's going to start at the center back position next to Tomáš Gojvida. Who knows? But anyway, stay posted, or keep yourself posted, I should say. Stay tuned. And follow Beşiktaş International at Beşiktaş_INT. Follow Khan, who is not here this week, but will likely be back. Will definitely be back soon enough. At Razarian, at RAZZ. We don't do Z's in here. RAZZERIAN. Follow me at Sir_writes_a lot. I talk a lot. I don't write a lot. I should be writing more. Hopefully that can be assuaged in 2019. What else is there to say, really? Nothing. Except, of course, for the usual and the perpetual. The always, the persistent. Go Beşiktaş! Regardless of where we are now, there's always tomorrow. Brighter days ahead.
Çok harikasın. Çok güzelsin. Harika.
Stay tuned for more, guys. Peace out. See you guys next week.
Beşiktaş International hopes you enjoyed this program.